The golden hour cast long shadows across the Wilsons' front porch, where John sat watching Martha tend to her beloved roses. 60 years of marriage had taught him to appreciate these quiet moments. Her movements were slower now, more deliberate, but she still possessed that graceful elegance that had captured his heart decades ago. "Come inside, sweetheart," John called softly. "Dinner's getting cold." Martha straightened, pressing her hand to her lower back with a gentle wince. At 79, she carried her age well, but John noticed the subtle changes. The way she paused longer between tasks, how she sometimes stared into the distance with troubled eyes, lost in thoughts she never shared. Their home stood as a monument to their enduring love. Family photographs lined every surface, chronicling birthdays, graduations, and holidays. Their 3 children had grown into successful adults, blessing them with 7 grandchildren who filled their twilight years with purpose and joy. "You know what I was thinking about today?" Martha said as they settled at the dining table. The evening light streaming through lace curtains illuminated her face, revealing worry lines that seemed deeper than usual. "Tell me," John replied, reaching for her hand across the table. "Our early years, when you worked in Detroit." Her voice carried an odd tremor. "Those were difficult times." John squeezed her fingers gently. "But we made it through. That job gave us everything we needed to build this life." Martha's smile flickered, not quite reaching her eyes. "Yes, we did make it through." The silence that followed felt different somehow. John had learned to read his wife's moods over 6 decades, and something was troubling her deeply. He'd noticed it for weeks now. The way she'd stop mid-sentence, her distant stares, the restless nights when he'd wake to find her sitting by the window. "Martha, you've been different lately. What's on your mind?" She pulled her hand away, folding both in her lap. "Just old memories, John. Sometimes they feel more real than the present." That night, as John prepared for bed, he found Martha in their study, staring at a small wooden box he'd never seen before. When she noticed him, she quickly closed it and tucked it into her desk drawer. "What was that?" he asked. "Nothing important. Just old papers." But John knew Martha well enough to recognize a lie. In 60 years of marriage, she'd never been secretive about anything. They'd built their relationship on complete honesty, sharing every triumph and disappointment. This sudden mystery felt like a crack in their foundation. The next morning brought troubling news. Dr. Reynolds called with Martha's test results. The persistent fatigue and occasional confusion weren't just signs of aging. Martha was in the early stages of a condition that would progressively steal her memories and, eventually, her life. John held Martha as she wept in his arms, both of them grappling with the cruel irony. They'd survived 60 years together, weathering every storm life had thrown at them, only to face an enemy they couldn't fight or overcome. "How long?" Martha whispered. He couldn't say for certain. "Maybe a year, maybe more. We'll face it together, just like everything else." But Martha's tears intensified, and John sensed they weren't just for the diagnosis. "There's something else, isn't there?" Martha pulled away, her eyes red but determined. "I need to tell you something, John. Something I should have told you long ago. Whatever it is, we'll handle it." "No," she said firmly. "This is different. This will change everything between us." John felt a chill despite the warm morning air. "Martha, you're scaring me." She stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked their garden. "I've been carrying this secret for 60 years, John. Every day, every night. It's been eating at me. But I was too afraid to tell you. Too afraid of losing you." "You could never lose me. We promised each other, remember? For better or worse." Martha turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Even if I betrayed you, even if everything you believe about our life together is built on a lie." John's stomach dropped. The woman he'd loved unconditionally for 6 decades, the mother of his children, the partner who'd shared every significant moment of his adult life, was telling him their entire relationship was founded on deception. "What are you saying?" Martha's voice broke as she whispered. "While you were in Detroit, I wasn't the faithful wife you thought I was. I made a terrible mistake, John. A mistake that created consequences I've hidden from you every single day since." The room seemed to spin around John. 60 years of memories flashed through his mind. Their wedding day, the birth of their children, countless anniversaries and holidays. Had it all been tainted by something he didn't even know existed? "I need to show you something," Martha said, returning to the desk drawer. She retrieved the wooden box with trembling hands. "Everything you need to know is in here. But John, once you see it, once you know the truth, nothing will ever be the same between us." John stared at the box as if it contained a bomb ready to explode his entire world, because in many ways it did. The wooden box sat between them on the coffee table like an unexploded bomb. John's hands trembled as he reached for it, then pulled back. Some truths, once revealed, could never be taken back. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked Martha, searching her face for any sign of hesitation. Martha nodded, though tears continued streaming down her cheeks. "I can't die with this secret, John. You deserve to know the truth about who you've been married to all these years." With deliberate slowness, John lifted the lid. Inside, yellowed papers were arranged in careful order. The first document made his blood run cold, a birth certificate dated September 15th, 1965. The child's name was listed as Michael James Reynolds, but the mother's name stopped his heart. Martha Elizabeth Wilson. "I don't understand," John whispered, though deep down, he was beginning to comprehend the unthinkable. "While you were working in Detroit," Martha began, her voice barely audible, "I was alone for months at a time. You were doing what you had to do for our family, working those long contracts to give us a better life. But John, I was so lonely, so desperately lonely." John's hand shook as he set down the birth certificate. "Martha, please tell me this isn't what I think it is." His name was David Chun. He was the new pastor at our church, just arrived from California. He was kind, intelligent, and he listened to me when I talked about how much I missed you. At first, it was just friendship. He'd stop by to check on me, help with repairs around the house. The room felt like it was closing in on John. 60 years of trust, of complete faith in the woman he'd loved above all else, was crumbling before his eyes. One evening, I was particularly upset. You'd called to say your contract was extended another 3 months. I broke down crying, and David comforted me. One thing led to another, and Martha's voice broke entirely. "You had an affair," John finished, his voice hollow. "It wasn't an affair, John. It was one night. One terrible, selfish moment of weakness that I've regretted every single day since. But the consequences." She gestured toward the box. John picked up the next document. Hospital records showing Martha's admission for childbirth. His mind raced, calculating dates. September 1965. He'd been in Detroit. When he'd returned home in October, Martha had seemed different, quieter, but he'd attributed it to the long separation. "Where is he?" John asked, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. "I gave him up for adoption immediately. A wonderful family in Chicago, the Reynolds. They couldn't have children of their own, and they gave Michael everything I couldn't. A stable home, 2 loving parents, opportunities one could never have provided." John found photographs in the box, a newborn baby, then pictures that had clearly been sent by the adoptive family over the years. A toddler taking his first steps, a young boy in a baseball uniform, a teenager graduating high school, a young man in a cap and gown at college graduation. "You've been in contact with them?" "Not directly. They sent updates through the adoption agency for the first 18 years. After that," Martha's voice trailed off, "I hired a private investigator once, just to know he was okay. He became an architect, John. He's married with children of his own." John stared at the most recent photograph, a successful-looking man in his 50s, standing in front of a building with an architectural firm sign. The resemblance to John's own father was unmistakable around the eyes and jawline. "Does he know about me? About us?" "No. As far as he knows, Richard and Angela Reynolds are his only parents. I made sure of that." The betrayal cut deeper than John had thought possible. Not just the affair, devastating as that was, but the decades of deception. Every holiday, every anniversary, every moment of intimacy they'd shared had been shadowed by this secret. "Our children," John said suddenly, Do they know they have a half-brother? Martha shook her head. No one knows except me. And now you. John stood abruptly, needing to move, to escape the suffocating weight of revelation. He walked to their wedding photo hanging on the wall. They looked so young, so hopeful, so certain they were starting a life of complete honesty and trust. Why now, Martha? Why tell me this now? Because I'm dying, John, and because I realized that keeping this secret was selfish. I was protecting myself, not you. You had the right to know you had another son out there. You had the right to choose whether to find him. John turned back to his wife, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time in decades. The woman he'd idealized, put on a pedestal, worshipped for her strength and virtue. She was human after all. Flawed, frightened, capable of devastating mistakes. I need some air, he said, heading toward the door. John, please don't leave. Let's talk about this. He paused at the threshold. Martha, you've had 60 years to process this secret. I've had 60 minutes. I need time to think. Outside, the evening air felt sharp against his skin. John walked their neighborhood streets, passing houses where other couples were sharing their own quiet dinners, their own conversations. Did any of them harbor secrets this devastating? By the time he returned home, Martha was asleep in her chair, the box still open on the coffee table. John studied the photographs again, particularly the recent ones. Michael Reynolds, his son, looked happy and successful. He had a family, a career, a life completely separate from the Wilsons. But he also had John's father's eyes and his grandmother's stubborn chin. He was blood of John's blood, living 3 hours away, completely unaware of his biological father's existence. As John finally headed to bed, one question dominated his thoughts. What was he supposed to do with this knowledge? And more importantly, did he have the right to disrupt Michael Reynolds' life with a truth that might destroy his own sense of identity? The secret was out, but John realized Martha's confession had only created more questions than answers. John barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Michael Reynolds' face staring back at him from those photographs. By dawn, he'd made a decision that both terrified and thrilled him. He had to find his son. Martha was already awake when he came downstairs, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold in her hands. The wooden box sat open beside her, its contents spread across the surface like evidence in a trial. I'm going to find him, John announced without preamble. Martha looked up, her eyes red from crying. John, are you sure? His whole life could be turned upside down. My whole life already has been. I have a son I've never met, grandchildren I've never held. 60 years of his life have passed without me knowing he existed. John sat across from her, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. I need to at least see him, even if I never introduce myself. The private investigator's report is in there, Martha said, gesturing toward the papers. It's 10 years old, but it might be a starting point. John found the document. Michael James Reynolds, architect with Stevenson and Associates in downtown Chicago. Married to Jennifer Reynolds, 2 children, Emma, age 12, and David, age 9. The irony of the boy's name wasn't lost on John. David, he asked. Martha's face crumpled. I named Michael's son after his biological father. I know it's terrible, but it was my way of... I don't know what I was thinking. John studied the report more carefully. Michael lived in Lincoln Park, drove a blue Honda Accord, coached Little League Baseball. The mundane details of a stranger's life who happened to share John's DNA. I'll need current information, John said. This address might not be good anymore. Over the next week, John threw himself into research with an intensity that worried Martha. He spent hours at the library using their computers, searching social media, professional directories, anything that might give him a current picture of Michael's life. The breakthrough came when he found Stevenson and Associates' website. Michael Reynolds was listed as a senior partner, his professional headshot showing a distinguished man with John's father's strong jawline and serious expression. But it was Michael's personal interests listed in his bio that made John's heart race. He coached youth baseball and volunteered at a local children's hospital. John drove to Chicago on a Tuesday morning, telling Martha he needed time alone to think. The city overwhelmed him after decades of small-town living, but he navigated downtown until he found the gleaming office building that housed Michael's firm. For 3 hours, John sat in his car across the street, watching people enter and exit the building. He wasn't sure what he was hoping for, a glimpse of his son, perhaps, or just the courage to approach him. At 12:30, Michael emerged from the building. John's breath caught in his throat. Seeing his son in person was like looking at a version of himself from 30 years ago. Michael walked with purpose, carrying himself with the confidence of a successful man who'd never doubted his place in the world. John followed at a distance as Michael entered a nearby cafe. Through the window, he watched his son order lunch, check his phone, smile at something on the screen. Probably a text from his wife or children, the family John had never known existed. The urge to approach was overwhelming, but John hesitated. What would he say? "Hello, I'm the father you never knew you had." The scenario seemed impossible, potentially devastating to everyone involved. Instead, John spent the afternoon learning Michael's routine. He worked late, leaving the office around 7. He stopped at a grocery store, selecting items with the careful attention of a man who shared cooking duties with his wife. When Michael drove home to a beautiful brownstone in Lincoln Park, John parked down the street and watched. Through the large front window, John glimpsed a family scene that took his breath away. Michael hugged a teenage girl, Emma, presumably, and ruffled the hair of a younger boy. A woman John assumed was Jennifer kissed Michael hello, and they all sat down to dinner together. John watched his son's family for an hour, memorizing details. The easy laughter, the comfortable intimacy of people who truly knew and loved each other. Michael was clearly a devoted father and husband, the kind of man John had raised his own children to become. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Michael already had a complete life. He didn't need John's presence to make him whole. The Reynolds family had raised him with love, given him every opportunity, shaped him into the successful man he'd become. But as John drove back home that night, another thought haunted him. Michael had the right to know the truth about his origins, didn't he? Even if that truth was painful, even if it disrupted his carefully constructed world? Martha was waiting up when John returned, her anxiety written across her face. "You saw him," she said. It wasn't a question. John nodded, sinking into his favorite chair. "He's everything we could have hoped for, Martha. Successful, happily married, a good father. The Reynolds gave him a wonderful life. But he's my son, and I think he deserves to know where he came from, even if he chooses not to have a relationship with us." Martha was quiet for a long moment. "What are you going to do?" John looked at the woman he'd loved for 60 years, seeing her clearly now, not as the perfect wife he'd idealized, but as a flawed human being who'd made a terrible mistake and spent decades trying to protect everyone from its consequences. "I'm going to tell him the truth," John said finally. "But I'm going to do it right. Not as an ambush, not as a demand for a relationship, but as information he has the right to possess." Martha reached for his hand. "Are you sure you're ready for whatever his reaction might be? He could be angry. He could want nothing to do with us." John squeezed her fingers, feeling the fragility of her bones beneath papery skin. "I've lost 60 years with my son because of secrets and fear. I won't lose whatever time we might have left to the same things." The decision was made. Tomorrow, John would begin the most difficult conversation of his life. John spent 3 sleepless nights crafting the perfect letter. Every word mattered. Too direct, and he might send Michael running. Too vague, and his son might dismiss it as nonsense from a stranger. The letter went through 17 drafts before John was satisfied. "Dear Mr. Reynolds," it began, "my name is John Wilson, and I have information about your biological family that I believe you have the right to know. I understand this may come as a shock, but I have documentation that suggests I am your birth father. If you're willing to meet, I would like to share this information with you in person. I want nothing from you except the opportunity to tell you the truth about where you came from." John included his phone number and address, then sealed the envelope before he could change his mind again. The next morning, he drove back to Chicago and slipped the letter under Michael's office door before business hours began. For 5 days, John heard nothing. He jumped every time the phone rang, checking the caller ID with desperate hope. Martha grew increasingly worried about his agitation, but she understood the weight of waiting for a response that might never come. On Friday evening, as John sat in his garden trying to find peace among Martha's roses, his phone finally rang. The number was unfamiliar, with a Chicago area code. "Mr. Wilson?" The voice was cautious, professional. "This is Michael Reynolds. I got your letter." John's heart hammered against his ribs. "Thank you for calling. I know this must be confusing." "Confusing doesn't begin to cover it," Michael replied. "Look, I don't know what kind of scam this is, but I'm adopted. My parents, Richard and Angela Reynolds, were very open about that, but they never mentioned anything about my birth parents trying to make contact." "It's not a scam, Michael, and your adoptive parents wouldn't know because we've never tried to contact them or you before now." There was a long pause. John could hear traffic in the background and realized Michael had stepped outside his office to make this call. "Why now?" Michael asked finally. John closed his eyes, choosing his words carefully. "Because your birth mother is dying, and she finally told me about you. I've spent 60 years not knowing I had another son." "Another son?" "You have 3 half-siblings. David is 58, Sarah is 56, and Thomas is 53. They don't know about you yet." The silence stretched so long that John wondered if the call had been disconnected. Finally, Michael spoke again, his voice strained. "This is insane. You're telling me my entire understanding of my life is wrong." "I'm not trying to turn your world upside down," John said gently. "The Reynolds are your real parents in every way that matters. They raised you, loved you, made you who you are. I'm the man who provided half your DNA." "I need proof," Michael said abruptly. "If you're really my biological father, you'll have documentation." "I do. Birth certificate, adoption records, hospital records, everything your birth mother kept for 60 years. Another long pause. "Can you meet me tomorrow? There's a coffee shop on Madison Street called Brew House. 2 o'clock. "I'll be there," John said, but Michael had already hung up. That night, John organized all the documents Martha had kept in her wooden box. He added recent photographs of their family, pictures that showed Michael what his other life might have looked like. Martha watched him work, her hands trembling more than usual. He sounded angry. John told her, "He has every right to be angry." Martha replied, "His whole world just got turned upside down." The next morning, John made the drive to Chicago with a mixture of anticipation and dread. He arrived at Brew House early, choosing a corner table where they could speak privately. The cafe was busy with Saturday afternoon shoppers, but John barely noticed the activity around him. At exactly 2 o'clock, Michael walked through the door. He looked older than he had in the surveillance photos, stress lines marking his face. He spotted John immediately. The family resemblance was too strong to miss, and approached the table with visible reluctance. "Mr. Wilson?" Michael extended his hand formally. "Please call me John." They shook hands, and John felt a jolt of recognition. Michael had his grandfather's strong grip. Michael sat across from him, his posture rigid. "I'll be honest with you. I almost didn't come. This whole situation is—" He shook his head. "I have a good life, a family I love. I'm not looking for complications." "I understand completely," John said. "I'm not here to complicate your life. I just wanted you to know the truth about where you came from." John slid the folder of documents across the table. Michael opened it with obvious reluctance, his expression changing as he examined each paper. The birth certificate, the adoption records, hospital documentation from his birth. "This is really me?" Michael asked, holding up the birth certificate. John nodded. "Your birth mother's name is Martha Wilson. She's my wife of 60 years. You were born September 15th, 1965, at Mercy Hospital in Jackson, Mississippi." Michael studied a photograph of Martha from the 1960s, then looked up at John with confusion. "She's not. I mean, in this picture, she's white." "Yes, and your biological father was Chinese American. David Chun was the pastor at our church." Michael's face went pale. "My biological father isn't you?" John felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. No, I'm married to your biological mother, but I'm not your biological father. I didn't even know you existed until a week ago. The confusion in Michael's eyes turned to something harder. So why are you here? What do you want from me? I want to know you, John said simply. You're not my biological son, but you're part of my family story. Your birth mother has carried the secret of your existence for 60 years. She's dying now, and she wanted you to know where you came from. Michael leaned back in his chair, processing this information. Where is he? David Chun. He died in a car accident 2 years after you were born. He never knew about you either. The weight of these revelations settled over Michael like a heavy blanket. John watched his son struggle with information that challenged everything he believed about his identity. I need to think about all this, Michael said finally, closing the folder. Of course. But Michael. John paused, wondering if he had the right to ask. Would you consider meeting Martha? She's been carrying guilt about you for 60 years. It would mean everything to her to know you're okay. Michael stood abruptly. I can't promise anything. This is all too much. As John watched his son walk away, he realized that finding Michael had only been the beginning of a much more complicated journey. 2 weeks passed without a word from Michael. John tried to maintain his normal routine, but Martha could see the disappointment weighing on him. She grew weaker each day, and John knew their time was running short. Maybe he's just processing everything, Martha said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Finding out your entire origin story is a lie. That takes time to absorb. I keep thinking I pushed too hard, John replied. Maybe I should have let sleeping dogs lie. Martha reached for his hand with fingers that felt like delicate bird bones. No, John. He needed to know. Even if he never contacts us again, he deserved the truth. That night, Martha had a particularly bad episode, becoming confused and calling John by her father's name. Dr. Reynolds had warned them this would happen more frequently as her condition progressed. John helped her to bed, his heart breaking as he watched the woman he'd loved for 60 years slip away piece by piece. At 3 a.m, the phone rang. John grabbed it quickly, hoping not to wake Martha. Mr. Wilson? It's Michael. The voice sounded tired, strained. Michael, are you all right? I've been thinking about everything you told me. I have more questions, and He paused. I'd like to meet Martha, if she's willing. John's relief was so overwhelming, he had to sit down. She'd love that. But Michael, you should know, she's not well. Her mind isn't always clear anymore. I understand. Would this weekend work? They arranged for Michael to visit on Saturday afternoon. John spent the intervening days preparing Martha, explaining who Michael was during her lucid moments, and hoping she'd remember when the time came. Saturday arrived gray and drizzly. John watched from the window as a silver sedan pulled into their driveway. Michael sat in the car for several minutes before getting out, carrying a small bouquet of flowers. John opened the door before Michael could knock. Thank you for coming. I almost didn't, Michael admitted. This still feels surreal. Martha was having a good day, alert and properly dressed in her favorite blue sweater. When Michael walked into the living room, she gasped, covering her mouth with both hands. You look just like him, she whispered. Just like David when he was young. Michael approached slowly, offering the flowers. Mrs. Wilson, I'm Michael. I know who you are, sweetheart. I've known every day for 60 years. Martha accepted the flowers with trembling hands. You're even more handsome than I imagined you'd become. They sat together on the couch, and John watched from his chair as Martha studied Michael's face like she was memorizing every detail. I need you to know, Martha began. Giving you up was the hardest thing I ever did, but I was 20 years old, married to a man working in another state, and I'd made a terrible mistake. I couldn't raise you properly, and the Reynolds, they were desperate for a child. I thought I was doing what was best for everyone. Michael nodded slowly. They were good parents. Great parents. They gave me everything a child could want. I'm so glad, Martha said, tears streaming down her face. That's all I ever wanted, for you to be loved and happy. For the next hour, Michael asked questions about his origins, about David Chun, about the circumstances of his birth. Martha answered everything with painful honesty, holding nothing back. John watched his wife finally release the burden she'd carried for 6 decades. "I have pictures of David," Martha said, producing a small album John had never seen. "I kept them all these years." Michael studied photos of a young man with kind eyes and Michael's exact smile. "He looks like he was a good person." "He was," Martha confirmed. "He made one mistake, just like I did. But he was gentle and caring. I think you got the best of both of us." As the afternoon progressed, Michael shared stories of his own life. He showed Martha pictures of his wife Jennifer and his children, Emma and David. Martha wept when she saw her grandson's face, another David to carry on the legacy of his biological grandfather. "They don't know about any of this yet," Michael explained. "I'm not sure how to tell them." "You don't have to tell them anything," John said. "This is your story to share or keep private." Michael looked thoughtful. "Actually, I think I want them to know. Not because it changes who I am, but because it gives me a more complete picture of where I came from." As the sun began to set, Michael prepared to leave. Martha hugged him tightly, whispering something in his ear that made him nod and smile. "What did she say?" John asked after Michael had gone. "That she loves me," Michael replied, "and that I should keep in touch." Over the following months, Michael became a regular visitor. He brought his family to meet Martha during her increasingly rare lucid moments. Emma and David were fascinated by their newly discovered grandmother, and Jennifer embraced Martha with genuine warmth. Martha passed away peacefully on a Tuesday morning in early spring, surrounded by all her children, including the son she'd thought she'd lost forever. At her funeral, Michael spoke about the courage it took for someone to finally tell a truth they'd hidden for 60 years. "She gave me life twice," Michael said. "Once when I was born, and again when she gave me the gift of knowing where I came from." In the months that followed, John and Michael built a relationship that 60 years of separation had denied them. They weren't father and son in the traditional sense, but they became something equally precious, family by choice rather than just by blood. John kept Martha's garden thriving, tending her roses with the same loving care she'd shown them. And sometimes, when Michael's children visited, John would tell them stories about their grandmother Martha, the woman who'd loved them before they were even born, who'd carried their existence in her heart through 6 decades of secrecy and shame. The truth had indeed changed everything, just as Martha had predicted. But sometimes, John reflected as he watched his expanded family gather for Sunday dinners. The most devastating truths lead to the most beautiful redemptions. Their 60-year love story had been built on a secret, but it ended with a family made whole by the courage to finally speak that secret aloud. The end. This story reminds us that truth, no matter how painful, has the power to heal wounds we didn't even know existed. Sometimes the greatest act of love is having the courage to be completely honest, even when that honesty might destroy everything we hold dear.